Now, what is modernism? It is that cluster of habits of mind, of assumptions, of attitudes, of values, which prevail in the modern world. Lord Northbourne, trying to sum up what all of these modern attitudes and values comprised, came up with this list of adjectives. Modernism is anti-traditional, progressive, humanistic, rationalist, materialist, experimental, individualist, egalitarian, free-thinking and intensely sentimental. What I want to do is look at 4 modern thinkers who characterise some of the developments which I've been talking about in very general and abstract terms to make it a little more concrete. So my 4 representatives: Darwin, Marx, Freud, Nietzsche. I just want to identify 1 or 2 key ideas with each of these figures and comment on the way in which it is symptomatic of the modernist mentality. Now, Darwinism. Let's just step back for a moment, ladies and gentlemen. Just step back from everything that you've been taught, everything that you've read, what's been indoctrinated in you at school. Just step back for a moment, take a deep breath, and calmly consider what is being proposed. What is being proposed is that a stone can turn into Mozart. That algal slime can turn into St. Francis. That from inert matter, through all sorts of mysterious processes over a very, very long period of time, consciousness emerges from non-consciousness. This is the most fantastic proposition. It defies all logic, it defies all sense. And of course it flies in the face of all traditional teaching, all of which insist that humankind, and indeed all other creatures, are the product not of an ascent out of inert matter, but of a descent from a celestial realm. The key idea in Darwinism, apart from this preposterous notion that consciousness and life can emerge from dead matter, is the notion that one species can turn into another. Now, Darwin may or may not have had some insight into various biological processes. I don't want to argue about that right now, but I do want to refute completely the idea that one species can turn into another. As E.F. Schumacher said in his book of some years ago, it makes as much sense to call human beings trousered apes as it does to call a dog a barking cabbage. The mineral, the vegetable, the animal and the human realms are quite distinct and have always been so and always will be so, because all phenomena descend from their celestial archetypes. They do not grapple their way out of the primeval slime and suddenly become intelligent beings. That process is a complete nonsense. And of course, if we take the first few verses of that most exalted of mystical texts, the Gospel of St. John, remind ourselves of the first few words of that Gospel and interpret them in a metaphysical and not in a strictly narrow theological fashion. In the beginning was the Word. And eventually, I think it's by verse 14, the Word becomes flesh. What is the greater significance, metaphysical significance of this passage? It is that matter comes from spirit, to put it most simply. Matter emerges from spirit. Spirit cannot emerge from matter. That would be the greater coming from the lesser. That cannot happen. But Darwinism, of course, has been seductive because it is ingenious, there's no doubt. He was a very clever person. It is ingenious, it is elegant, it is seductive, and it is absolutely pernicious, because it persuades us that we are no more than biological organisms. But Darwinism was one of these mythologies which beautifully fitted the prejudices of the age. And its great appeal was that it offered an account of how life came to be and how life in its various forms appeared without the Creator, without God. An account which could leave God out of the picture. And yet Darwin is one of the luminaries of modern science. To question Darwin is to announce that one is some kind of fanatic or some kind of lunatic. Now, of course, it is a terrible pity that most of the opponents of Darwin mount the challenge on the wrong grounds. All right, let me move along. Marx. A couple of years back, they took a poll in England. They asked people, who is the most influential thinker of the last 1,000 years? Not the last 10 or the last 100, the last 1,000 years. The runaway winner by streets, Karl Marx. I'm sure you all know a good deal about Karl Marx. Let me just recall what Friedrich Engels said at Marx's graveside at his funeral. Just as Darwin discovered the laws of development of organic nature, so Marx discovered the law of the development of human history. Somewhat labyrinthine passage, but the basic idea is very simple. You've all heard it. The material forces of history determine everything else, including art, politics, law, religion, and all the rest of it. Religion is the opium of the people. It's an instrument of class struggle. It is a sign of man's alienation and his ignorance from his true self. Marx is a humanist, as well as being a child of the Enlightenment in many other ways. The belief in progress, the belief in science, the belief in the perfectibility of man. There is one terribly dangerous idea lurking in Marx's scenario, and that is utopianism. The idea that all of the wrongs of the world, all of the injustice, all of the oppressions, the crime, the suffering, is all the result of faulty social organisation and of class struggle. And that if we could eliminate the causes of class struggle, namely private property, we could organise a world in which everyone got a fair shake, everyone got a fair amount of the cake, so to speak, and as Marx said, we could fish in the morning, hunt in the afternoon, raise cattle in the evening and philosophise in the night time. A charming prospect, is it not, ladies and gentlemen? A charming prospect. And in a way we might wish that it could be true, but of course we know better. Wherein lies the danger? Once men's minds are gripped by the idea that a perfect world is possible, then almost anything can be justified. If you seriously believe that if we just need to reorganise the social machinery and we will end up with a perfectly equitable and fair world, then almost any price would indeed be worth paying. When Trotsky was asked what he thought about the death of 6 million people in the Russian Civil War, he said, regrettable, but a small price to pay for the revolution. Freud. Now, Freud, we know, had an animus towards religion which, to use his own terms, can only be described as pathological. When he had his famous disagreement with Carl Jung, Freud's reaction was, again to use a popular Freudian word, almost hysterical. His attack on Jung, because Jung had dared to suggest that there might be something in religion which could illuminate the human condition. Freud was outraged by this notion. Freud, like Marx, like Darwin, thought of himself as a scientist. And he said there are three great enemies of science: art, philosophy, religion. He said art, well, we needn't worry too much about art because we all know that art is just an amusement. Philosophy. We need not worry too much about philosophy, because after all, philosophy is only for philosophers. And Freud himself said that science had delivered 3 massive body blows to religion, 3 death blows, fatal blows. The first was Copernican cosmology, the second was Darwinian evolutionism, and the third was Freudian psychoanalysis. The last contribution to the criticism of the religious Weltanschauung, he wrote, was affected by psychoanalysis, by showing how religion originated from the helplessness of children and by tracing its contents to the survival into maturity of the wishes and needs of childhood. In other words, religion is a kind of prolongation of childish neuroses, complexes, insecurities, whatever, and obviously something that a healthy, well-adjusted adult should leave behind, dispense with. I return to my earlier point. These theories, these mythologies, these schema of people like Darwin, Marx and Freud are not so many different ideologies and theories. They are really all the one theory in different forms, in different modes of expression, because fundamentally they are all based on the same premises. They are the premises of modernity, i.e. progress, evolution, the triumph of science, and a whole set of ideas which people take for granted, which seem to be part of the air we breathe, which seem to be natural. But really, if you stand back and look at them, they're actually quite extraordinary. Let me give you an example. Modernism is based on the idea that everything, all people, everywhere, all over the globe, throughout all the centuries, what all those people in all those places and times have said about the nature of reality is wrong. The only people who know how things really are is this very small group of Western European intellectuals over the last 300 or 400 years. They know. Nobody else knew. They've finally woken up. All these other people believed in God, they believed in an afterlife, they believed in the primacy of the spirit. All those beliefs were wrong. We know that because the men in the white coats have told us. And that's it. If Stephen Hawking says that he's coming up with a grand theory of everything and that we needn't worry anymore, he's going to explain everything, well, that's fine. That's science. That's progress. It's bizarre, is it not, ladies and gentlemen? It is bizarre, it is grotesque, it is sinister.